But how about this? Labour U-turns to revive free speech law. This is something that's happening in the world of academia, so it won't affect everybody. But Bridget Phillips, from the Education Secretary, is poised to bring back the Higher Education Act, which is the thing that she was saying that she was going to completely disavow. This is the thing that basically protects academics from being able to say whatever it is that they want, because the Tories tried to introduce it, didn't get through in time. Labour said they were going to kill it, which would have put a kind of a rather chilling, shall we say, straitjacket on what some people would have been allowed to say in academic scenarios. So that's good news. Let's now talk about what's happening in May, because a lot of people are looking at polls these days saying that, look, Reform and Labour looking pretty neck and neck in certain instances. Tories down in third place, the Lib Dems in fourth, the Greens not really anywhere. But there's a lot of talk about what happens at the May local elections and whether that could have some impact on the way that Keir Starmer is perceived, the way that the Labour government is perceived. John Curtice, Sir John Curtice, I should say, is here with us, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, and a man you must always consult when you need to know what is actually going on in the world of psephology. Sir John, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Mike.
Now, I've been asking this question for quite some time, and I'm hoping you can answer it. What is actually happening in May? Because nobody seems to be able to tell me. I know that Sussex, I think, is not going to have elections because they're busy sort of putting West Sussex and East Sussex together and making a conglomeration of some kind of region. But it's not very clear what's going on, really.
Well, the short answer to your question is, do we know what's going to happen at the beginning of May in terms of how many elections are going to be held? The answer is we don't. Originally, there were just over 30 councils that were due to have local elections. These are primarily county councils like Oxfordshire or indeed East and West Sussex, or places that used to be county councils that are now single-tier county councils, somewhere like Cornwall.
Yeah.
But just before Christmas, the UK government came out with its white paper on devolution. Now, what do you think does that to do with local government changes? Well, the answer is, in that white paper, the government very clearly says that it thinks that devolution is only going to work if we have single-tier councils throughout England. Now, we've been, when we had the last major government reorganisation back in the 1970s, we created two tiers of local government everywhere. That is gradually being eroded by both Labour and Conservative governments. But we've still got areas with two tiers, and Oxfordshire is one such example. But the government's very clear, no, we should have single tiers only, local authorities of around 500,000 or so people each, and each of them ideally, though not necessarily headed by a mayor who might represent more than one local authority. So one of the things you have to grasp your mind around is that a white paper that's about devolution, and therefore you might think it's about getting power away from Westminster down to a lower level, is actually predicated on increasing the size of local government councils, at least in parts of England.
It's kind of centralising bits of it, isn't it?
Well, there's an element to it. And then, of course, what is that? And the government says, we think local government will be more efficient. It will help to deliver the growth thereafter. Now, what then has come on top of that is that it then also said separately, just before Christmas, well, actually, quite a lot of the places we're talking about are places where the county council is just about to have an election.
Right.
So they can apply to us to postpone their election if, as a result, we can get this new structure in place more quickly as a result.
Right.
And so far, basically, nearly all of the county councils that are still county councils with district councils underneath them have applied, but it's an application to delay their elections. Now, how many of these are going to be accepted, we don't know. We may not know until the end of March, but the government clearly is minded to go with this if they think that these local authorities can come up with proposals for single-tier authorities and a mayoral structure within the matter of the next few weeks, and that therefore you can delay the elections because you will be electing people to an authority that would be disappearing in 12 months.
So it may well be then that there won't be any local elections if all of these applications to postpone
That's not the case. That's not the case, because some of the local authorities have not applied, partly because they've already have other devolution deals in place, and we've also got other authorities like Buckinghamshire, like Cornwall, that are already single tier, and where the elections are definitely still going to go ahead. So it's horribly complicated,
Yeah,
Mike.
I thought so.
But sure, the key point is that perhaps a significant number of elections, which are essentially taking place in Shire England, or would take place in Shire England. It's more Tory territory than Labour territory, but a lot of these elections may not take place. I'm sure both Reform and Liberal Democrats are none too happy, because both of them anticipated they might be able to pick up seats off a Conservative Party that is still not very popular, and which will be defending a rather good set of results when these councils were last elected back in May 2021.
Yeah, exactly right. Kind of ironic, isn't it, that two-tier Keir wants to do away with two-tier local government and make it single-tier, but of course he would deny that because of course he says he's not two-tier. And what do you make, aside from all of this wrangling and all of this uncertainty, of the polls that we've been seeing over the last few days and weeks? Because I was talking to one of our regular contributors, I think Dan Hodges, this morning, who said that, you know, the Reform polling seems to be now fairly baked in. You know, it's not the odd poll where they're coming up second to Labour or neck and neck with Labour, but it's in pretty much all polls now.
Well, it's certainly true that the rise of Reform is continuing. I mean, there are now, I think, 5-6 polls that have been conducted since Christmas. On average, Reform running at 24%. That is up 3 points on the polls in December, and those in turn were as much as 6 points up on what Reform achieved back in the July general election. So the rise of Reform is still continuing. It's a certain section of our society. So again, the YouGov poll that came out yesterday, that shows 50% of those people who voted for Brexit now saying that they won't vote for Reform. So that's very much the section of our society that is backing Reform. It does mean that at the moment it's still the Conservatives who are losing more votes to Reform, and this is the reason why the Conservatives are, if anything, down on the 24% they were at in the general election. But we are now also seeing signs of Labour losing some support to Reform, though the truth is Labour's problem is they're losing votes to everybody. They're losing votes to Tories, they're losing votes to the Democrats, losing votes to the Greens, as well as to Reform. But certainly, you certainly have to go back to the 1970s to find a government whose popularity with the electorate has fallen as quickly as this so early in its office. And in net terms, at least, it is Reform who at the moment are the principal beneficiaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems as though in Scotland, the SNP might perversely be a beneficiary as well, because I was talking to somebody up there yesterday who said that, you know, while Anna Sarwar was looking good to be the next First Minister when the elections are next year in the Scottish Parliament, he's looking a bit less likely now because of people's dispirited nature from the Labour government in Westminster.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the worst thing, always the biggest risk to Anna Sarwar's chances of becoming Scotland's First Minister in the May of next year was the fact that Sir Keir Starmer had won the election. It's always much more difficult for parties that are in office to do well in elections in mid-term. But certainly, I mean, Labour north of the border now are running at little more than 20%. Compared with the 35% they got in July. And that takes them pretty much back to what they were in the Holyrood election of 2021. So they may find themselves in not much of a strong position. Now, that said, it's not clear that the SNP are still not at the kind of levels of support that they were under Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon. Again, Reform are part of the story. The polling is suggesting that Reform could pick up around 12% of the vote north of the border, maybe a bit more. That would be enough for them to get representation at Holyrood, making it potentially difficult for both the SNP, let alone anybody else, to be able to form a government backed by a majority.
Absolutely. Fascinating as ever. Sir John Curtice, thank you very much indeed.